Hey everybody, let's talk about planning contexts as gameplay again. In the first video I talked about what it is and how it's implemented in current games, and now I want to talk about the future, because I think it's possible to implement it better than we are today. If you haven't watched the first video, go watch it. This is not a video about whether or not this is a good idea, it's a video about whether or not it can work. So feel free to talk about the concept on its own on the previous video, which is down in the description below. This video is about sucking less when we try and do it. So let's get started. The core problem with choosing context, with the players choosing contexts in a modern video game, is that the video game doesn't have a clue what they're doing. So the video game will just continue to serve up the same gameplay it always does. So if you go into Minecraft and you build yourself a fantasy castle, that's your dream. You're gonna build yourself a really cool fairy tale castle, right? And you got this planned out and that planned out, and then Minecraft says, oh well, here's some creepers, here's some spiders. You can't find certain resources because of biome limitations. Oh, you're starving to death. Maybe that's part of your dream. Maybe you want to build a fantasy castle while starving to death and being assaulted. But probably not. So you go into the options and you turn off monsters and you go into creative mode and you build your castle, and you have turned off the play so that you can play. Well, that seems pretty wasteful, doesn't it? Shouldn't the play make your experience richer? Shouldn't the players be supported by the play of the game? Wouldn't it be better if when we built this fantasy castle, the game made it more interesting because it understood that we were trying to build a fantasy castle? Ah, fantastical talk, right? Well, maybe not. Let's talk about it a little bit more. Fundamentally, the mechanics are still in play. So we're building this out of bricks, and characters walk at certain speeds and jump certain heights, and water flows in specific ways, and magma works in specific ways, and monsters work in specific ways. All of these mechanics still exist. All we've really done is turned off the game's judgment. The game is no longer allowed to try and create play because we know it can't do it any good. It's going to screw up our context by providing inadequate and irrelevant play. So we turn all that off and we provide our own play. But is there any way to make the game provide the right play? Is there any way to make things better? Well, one option, we could create a really advanced artificial intelligence capable of understanding all of the concepts in the world. Or we could pretend to do that and create a very basic heuristic and call it an artificial intelligence. But there's a problem with this. Left for AI, my butt. Left for Dead. There's a problem with this. This here focuses the player back into a core context that we've focused on. We've created this really nice core loop, and we want the player there all the time. So when you have a corrective element like this, the idea is it doesn't really understand what the players want. All it really understands is that the players are doing well or doing poorly in specific phases, and it can create challenges that will pull the players back into the ideal experience, which is not what we want. We want the opposite of that. We would like the player to go off and do what they want to do, and then we'll tag along and make things more interesting. So, good news, we don't need an AI. We need something much more simple. Right now, there are a few games that do something like this. For example, with Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld, you can set up your starting conditions very, very nuanced. You can create starting conditions that perfectly set up your context. So, where on the world are you going to be? Who are you going to be next to? What sort of terrain are you in? What sort of people did you bring? What sort of resources did you bring? What sort of animals did you bring? What sort of tech did you bring? What sort of storyteller did you set up? What sort of debug options did you put on? What sort of difficulty ratings are on? And on, and on, and on, and on, and on. You got this giant stack of options that you can set up at the beginning of the game. It just goes everywhere. And then at the end, you've got the perfect setup for your concept. In Dwarf Fortress, we would like to build a fortress in the mountains, and this fortress will defend against oncoming goblin hordes. There's our smokes. Here come the goblins. Let's fight them. Yeah. You can set that up great. You can get that going great. And then Dwarf Fortress will not care. Goblins might not attack. They might get it wiped out in year one. They might become your allies for some reason. You might get attacked by something else. Out from the depths comes a giant winged salamander or whatever. Now, randomness is part of these games. That's part of the reason that we would like to develop these concepts in the game, rather than just doodling them up. But randomness needs to have constraints. If you're playing a role-playing game and you're fighting a dragon and you roll that die to hit, you want to know whether you hit, or missed, or crited. You don't want a giant meteor to come down and kill the dragon at random. That just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit into the flow of the story. And if it happens once, you're so funny, Mr. GM. But if it happens every day, you don't have a GM. You got someone rolling up random shit from the monster manual and eating nachos. That's what we've got here, except for the computer programs don't eat nachos. We need the computer program to understand what we're trying to accomplish so that it can provide enriching play instead of distracting play. And this isn't quite enough. We can set up everything perfectly for our future, for the context we want to create. But the game can't follow through. The game doesn't understand what we want. So it just gives us random crap. How can we make that not happen? How can we make that work better? How can we make it so that it provides us with enriching crap instead? Well, let's talk about baby steps. One of the things we can do in RimWorld is create a world on an ice sheet, or create a base on an ice sheet, right? And we understand that's going to come with specific things that are going to be important in the mid and late game and even early game, right? You need food. You need warm clothes. You need heaters. You're going to have to be inside more than in other kinds of biomes. It's going to be rough trying to live on an ice sheet. Going to be rough in these very specific ways that are going to matter at different times. So if we were to think about the ice sheet as like an arc, we choose it at the beginning of the game and then it goes off, right? And we see things like, okay, well, food becomes really important here. And then you need some warm gear here because otherwise you'll die. But you're going to need even more warm gear here. We're going to have winters at some point, and then that's going to get really rough here. But the summer will come over here, right? We're going to have these beats that we're planning for. When we choose ice sheet, we don't choose it blindly. We choose it understanding that it's going to present specific kinds of challenges with specific intervals. It's an arc. Now, it's not a context. Not exactly. It's a piece of a context. We want to weave this together with other things that have their own particular patterns such that we get the kind of result we want. If we were building Fantasy Workshop, Santa's Fantasy Workshop on the iced North Pole, we might take something which helps us out with most of these challenges so that we don't have to build giant fields of wheat before we can start creating clothes. So we might take an alliance with a friendly neighbor that will understand, we can get food from them, and then we have to provide them with cool toys in exchange. That's cool. We got some synergy going between these two contexts, neither one of which requires the other. We can do these same concepts in other places, get other results with other combinations. It's great. The game doesn't understand what we're trying to do, but the game understands what we want. The game understands what we've chosen will happen in the future. And that's really the key, isn't it? But there is one more problem with this. As anybody who draws lines on paper can tell you, if you draw enough straight lines, they're going to diverge. So when we choose all of this stuff at the beginning, except for that one, if we choose all of this stuff at the beginning of the game, we're going to get some pretty important stuff happening near the beginning. But then it's going to get pretty scattershot. What's going to happen next year? What's going to happen the year after that? Business as usual. You're going to get the gameplay that the game provides no matter where you go. Once you've adapted to the Arctic, RimWorld plays the same way, regardless of whether you're in the Arctic or the jungle. It's the same setup once you've finished with the little bits that get in the way. So that's not very good. If we want to have context, we want the context to follow through. We want to be able to accomplish something. We want to not just survive the beginning of this complicated situation. We're trying to achieve something. And we need the game to understand that. So how do we do that? Well, how about we stop picking at the beginning? Or rather, we pick at the beginning and then also pick later. Ooh, look at these. These arcs are diverging. Oh, well, that's okay. Oh, these arcs are diverging? Oh, that's fine. Oh, these arcs are diverging? That's fine too. Cross over that one down there. By choosing important arcs in the game during play, you can continually adjust and readjust your trajectory. Arcs that you chose earlier may no longer be relevant and may just be background noise at this point. Arcs that you're choosing now will have beats in the future that the game is going to present with you, and you're going to have to work out. These are things that are going to help you create a future for your base. They're not things that you just do to get a challenge at the beginning. They create a future. They let you tell the game what you want to see over and over and over, constantly changing your mind and being annoying and whatever else you want to do. And the game is like, sounds good. Let's do it. Let's make it richer. You asked for, a fight. Well, I'm going to give you this particular kind of fight, and I bet you weren't expecting that. It's basically the same as it runs in a tabletop game, right? You don't just pick one adventure and then run that one adventure until, the monster's dead. Well, that's fine. We'll just keep being here, I guess. No. Once the monster dies, you get a new monster. Same idea here. You constantly iterate. You constantly retarget. And the game knows what you want because you told it what you want. The game knows what the future holds because you told it what the future holds. Give you a concrete example. It's not a great example, but it exists, and that means a lot. Amazing Cultivation Simulator, which is, if you've been watching my channel, my current obsession. I don't want to say it's a bad game. I also don't want to say it's a good game. It's an extremely opaque game. It's like Dwarf Fortress. In this game, you are building a martial arts sect, right? Full of fantasy martial artists. And when your martial artists level up enough, they get to choose fantasy magic to use. They get to learn how to be immortals with magical fire powers or whatever. And when you choose the martial art that these martial arts masters get to follow, you're choosing a martial art that has beats in the future. Very, very specific beats. So in a normal RPG, you might be like, okay, well, this guy's going to be a fire mage. And the game's like, sure, you're going to get as many fire spells as you want now. But in Amazing Cultivation Simulator, it's like, okay, well, you chose the fire mage, so if you ever fail your breakthrough, you're going to get seriously injured. Or you chose the sword guy, so in order to break through, you're going to have to kill people. Or you chose the alchemist, so in order to break through, you're going to need these $50,000 components. Or you chose, the charming character. So in order to break through, you're going to have to get married. Whatever it is, right? These examples are a little bit forced, but the idea here is all of these characters have beats in the future that you're signing them up for. Interactions with the world, which will change the way that your base will work. You can't just randomly kill someone without any effect, not unless you've really set something interesting up. It's always going to echo back onto your base. If you get married with someone, well, that means that you've got to set them up in a bedroom together, but what if they're two different elements and you can't have a bedroom that's two different elements, and all sorts of considerations on how your base is going to unfold, both large and small. Are you a good sect or are you a bad sect? Well, if you want to be a sword sect, that doesn't necessarily mean you're bad, because there are lots of bad sects you could just go hunt. But that's a consideration, isn't it? All of these beats happen in the future, and you've chosen for them to happen in the future. And you know what? That was your first martial artist. Here comes your second martial artist. Here comes your third martial artist. Each of them chooses a path that creates a future for them that works in your base's overall setup. And I mean, there are lots of considerations here. There's like elemental matching and stat matching and blah, 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 blah. But the point here is that as you move through this experience, you're building the martial arts sect you want to build by repeatedly choosing the kinds of futures that your martial artists have. And yes, it's a very martial artist-centric game. It's not really a base-building game. It's more like an immortal martial artist cat-herding game. But that is why this works, because the base-building part is only relevant enough to make these choices matter. It's not the focus. We could have the same setup anywhere we wanted. For example, what if you were doing a game like RimWorld, but the tech tree wasn't a tech tree? Instead, when you started to research a tech, it was an arc. So it was like, oh, you want to research the refinery tech? Well, you're going to get a refinery here. And then in order to advance to the next stage of the refinery, you're going to need to have 80,000 points of foreign research. So you've got to convince somebody to use your refinery oil or whatever so that you can see the result, or something like that. You can have all of these events where in order to advance to the next stage of the research, you have to engage with the world in specific ways. And it happens in the future. So you're like, okay, well, let's research this. And as it unfolds, we're going to have to be careful of that and that and that. Well, if we do more research over here with this, we can do it that way. And it's the same with things like laws. You could have laws that, +3 mood because of this law. But if you end up, wanting to advance to the next law, you're going to have to go through this phase here where there's massive crime spikes. Or cancel the law before you get there. I'm not going to say that this is a full-fledged idea. I'm trying to walk this concept into a direction where the gameplay functions with the player, where we have these concepts that get richer as we decide what we want to do. The game is not telling us what to do, but it's also not just mute. It's letting us lead, and it's following along, making things better and more interesting, in theory. Anyway, I hope that was clear. Let me know what you think.